Welcome back. Preston Jacobs has released his 5th chapter of the Fanfiction project, Riding the Winds of Winter, and I'm here to go over it with you all. This Arrow 2 is important for several plot points as well as world building for the project as a whole, and also contains the first major character death, so strap in, we do have a lot to cover. But first, let's recap the chapter. The chapter opens with our characters traveling towards High Hermitage. Obara is mortally wounded and no longer in command. Desiel Dalt is instead leading the party, which is now 30 men weaker than they set out as. Arrow does some reflecting as he struggles to command his horse. Named Mirror, this sand steed is a bit of an opposite toward Arrow's actual character. He looks at his reflection in the horse's eye and thinks about how he never used a mirror before, because they inspired vanity and he was raised in abnegation. We have a Pate misremember some history stating that Bloodraven rode Vagar, and the party jokes that Pate would make a good master. I see what you did there. They then recap the events that happened after the last chapter, going over how the Lannisters killed many more Dornishmen despite being outnumbered. Wait, wasn't that an act of war? Aren't the Lannisters gonna find out? I know people have been set up as fall guys and everything, but this is just a blatant act of war, right? I suppose the clock is ticking for our characters then, and the Dornish master plan. It's actually kind of interesting to see some stakes there. The party then spots a scout, but fail to catch or kill him in the pursuit. Instead, they reach High Hermitage, which is now seen by the readers for the first time. It is described as massive and well designed, and built into a mountain, making it very difficult to attack. However, the moat is currently dry. I suppose this makes sense, and Westerosi weather would make rivers vary widely, as snowmelt would run out after about a year. Since seasons are so long, there would be no snowmelt and therefore no mountain streams a few years into summer and during autumn. Neat little nod to the turning of the seasons. We have gotten at least one every chapter in the project thus far. They camp at the base of the mountain for the night. Then an 11-year-old girl on a mule comes down from the castle. She claims she is acting on behalf of Darkstar, who will not treat with any Dalt. Since Obara is out of the action, it is up to our POV to be the negotiator, the messenger, an ambassador perhaps, or as one might say, an envoy, or maybe even an emissary. And so Darkstar and Arrow Hotah begin talks on the drawbridge of the castle. Darkstar is arrogant, but he seems to have enough skill, allies, and men in the castle to back up his braggadocious claims. He never directly insults Arrow, but he certainly throws plenty of shade and tries to hint at some subtle intimidation. Some of this humorously goes over Arrow's head, and some of it does offend Arrow, perhaps more than it should. Arrow relays the message Darkstar is to be tried for the crimes of maiming and assaulting Myrcella Baratheon, as well as killing Aerys Oakheart. We know Oakheart was killed by Arrow Hotah, and according to the Preston canon, Darkstar was framed for Myrcella's maiming. Both facts Darkstar does actually call Hotah out on, as well as confirming that Myrcella that we saw is actually a body double. Darkstar also gives a rundown of the complex Dornish political situation, or at least his part in it, as well as how things have been disrupted by the return of Jon Con. He also mentions the turning of the seasons, and those who have been following the project for the last few chapters will be aware of the White Raven subplot continuing to sow discord all across of Westeros. This time, Beware Jon was misinterpreted as relating to Jon Con and Darkstar's framing. Darkstar then rebukes Hotah and orders him to surrender, instead of Darkstar surrendering to Hotah, saying he will send a raven to Starfall if the company attacks his castle. He says he actually has tons of ravens and will send them everywhere, and Dorne will devolve into civil war if Obara's host does not surrender to him directly within the morrow. Hotah returns to camp with the report, but Obara claims Darkstar is bluffing and orders an attack. However, she dies before the morning and Hotah is now in command. Hotah makes the difficult decision to willingly surrender to Darkstar and rides to the castle with Desiel Dalt and goes into Darkstar's custody. After being detained, Darkstar reveals that all of his claims were lies and that he was bluffing about everything. The archers Hotah saw on the walls were little girls dressed up as archers, standing on crates. He has only 4 men under his command, and only 1 raven, the White Raven that was just sent by the Citadel. Additionally, he has no allies to call to, and no ability to start a Dornish civil war, even if he did have the ravens. The only things he was telling the truth about was the word of Jon Con and the fact that he was framed for Marcella's attack. The chapter ends with Hotah asking Darkstar where the real Marcella is, to which Darkstar retorts that Hotah should be the one who knows that. Hotah then asks the closing line, "Where do septas go?" As always, we conducted a survey over in the Discord trying to aggregate everyone's responses to the chapter. The link for the form is in the description, and the doc will be sent to Preston if you have any feedback for the project. To start off the results, it's interesting to note that this chapter is the second shortest produced so far, though it took by far the longest of any chapter. Interesting, the only shortest chapter was Daenerys 1. This is shorter than even Arrow 1, which was produced the fastest of any chapter. But it did seem to have the fewest draft submissions. Only 3 registered respondents actually submitted drafts, and I think I only remember seeing 5 actually shared in the Discord. Most people were somewhat or generally positive about this chapter, though there were a few people who felt that it had slipped below the average. The average ranking was about a 3.75 out of 5, which is on par, but again, a little lower than average. We have seen some low 4s. Most people are saying it is comparatively about average, or about 4th best out of the 5 released chapters. Most people are saying that its resemblance to Martin's style of writing is also waning, though it's still there, but it is clearly distinct from Martin according to the vast majority of respondents. Most people are opinionated on Obara's death in many different ways. Some people think it was good, another third don't really care, and then the other third just didn't really like it or thought that it wasn't confirmed. As for Arrow, most people thought that Arrow's continuation as a character was either very in character or a fun take on how he originally behaves. So generally positive within those two mains, though about 12% of respondents thought that Arrow is a betrayal of his original chapters as written by Martin. As for Darkstar, about half of the respondents really enjoyed Darkstar's portrayal, though about 40% thought it was inconsistent or didn't really have a strong opinion on it. As for the pacing of this chapter, 75% thought that it was ideal, while about 20% thought it was a little on the slow side. There were also some questions submitted about the chapter. We have compiled those and we'll submit them to Preston. Hopefully he reviews them for the next go-over of the project and he talks about Arrow 2. As for the feedback, most people were not too happy about some of the tones of the chapter, but still thought it was a good continuation of what we'd seen in Arrow 1. Some people thought that it was a little too fanficky, but mostly it was liked. There's some complaints about the details, but also a lot of well-liked details, such as naming the horse mirror. As far as the project as a whole goes, people are still really wanting the idea of having one chapter in editing and one chapter in writing, and that's a good idea, and I don't know why it hasn't been implemented yet. We just got 3 chapter outlines to submit in 3 weeks. Seems a little rushed, but we'll see how people respond to that. So far, the most anticipated POV remains Quentin Martell. As for my analysis of this chapter, well, the prose of this chapter was alright. There were some fun things, like a neat use of alliteration and some well-used words, but there were a few glaring grammatical errors, such as an included the that should have been deleted, and a Baratheon that was misspelled. The chapter is very much plot-driven, but we still have the characters have room to grow and interact in fun and new ways, so that was very nice. Arrow's character is quite fun this time again. Just like Arrow 1, this story is giving him much more agency as a character and a human than the actual Aswaf did. He's not the camera that rides, he actually makes decisions, and we see him progress through being a slow piecing together of the fact that he's being used as a pawn in the game much larger than himself. Sure, his thought process may be frequently flawed, but that is what makes reading him fun, and this is why we have different POVs. He is no longer merely following orders, he is actually giving them. Another theme for Arrow this chapter was the reflections in the horse named Mirror. The horse refuses to follow his commands and acts perpetually difficult. The horse was a gift from the Kingsguard, and coupled with its name, there are a lot of metaphors one could draw. Is Hotah resisting himself? Are the Kingsguard rejecting him? Is he struggling with his own vanity? Perhaps a clue stems from the brief reflection scenes that happen at the start and the end of the chapter. The first time, when Hotas sees his reflection in the horse's eye, a mirror, he thinks he is a stranger and discusses how reflections are symbols of vanity. I say that this is because Hotas is originally repulsed by his own agency, and he thinks he is a stranger because, like the God of the Seven, he has become an agent of death and an outsider merely used by others. At the end of this chapter, he looks at the horse mirror once more and thinks, "Was I always ugly?" He is coming to terms with his own reflection here. He has accepted his own agency, at least to some extent, even if he finds it repulsive still. At least that's my interpretation of the horses and reflections thing. Darkstar. Obviously, he wasn't going to lose the castle because Preston's interpretation of ASWAF is that every stated plan must fail, and an Ariane TWOW sample chapter states that Ariane is confident Obara and Arrow would be able to take Darkstar. We unfortunately don't get the level of lore for House Dane or the Sword of the Morning that we saw in some of the drafts or outlines, but we nevertheless got a fun character to play off of Hotas' slow but deliberate thought process. The reveal and the bluff at the end was quite a fun twist. Obara? Well, Obara dies. Why exactly? War is bad? I mean, that just doesn't really work here. Some have said cynically that PJ just doesn't know what to do with her. I really hope this isn't true. This is a disappointing end to what could have been a cool character arc. We discussed this in the podcast, but it would have been much better if Obara was bedridden and had to stay in some hospital for the remainder of the war. She got to witness her family tear itself apart and ultimately be destroyed by the pettiness of revenge. She would have been faced by the fundamental contradictions of war. Hell, imagine a Obara POV as like an epilogue. She could just be getting ravens the whole time and powerless to do anything. The Sand Snakes are ambitious to a fault, and having one in a position where they have no agency and literally can't do anything, and were faced by the futility of their own motives, would have been such a cool exploration into the humanity and morality of warfare. Would have been really neat, but nope, she just died. RIP. There are obviously other characters and themes to analyze here, such as Dalton emasculation or Darkstar's analysis of gender roles and how children and little girls are the ones who act as his soldiers in this chapter, but I really don't want to be here all day. As for other total details and themes, we really don't get much this chapter, and that seems to be the weakest part of the chapter for me. I would say all the Preston chapters thus far have been tonally inconsistent. While every book in ASWAF so far has had a clear theme driving the book, at least to some extent, this project doesn't have one yet, and that shows in this chapter. Even a shallow theme like War Bad would do wonders for continuity and giving authors themes to pull throughout the chapters. The TWOW sample chapters have already done a good job establishing such a theme about how fragile the feudal system will be in the face of any force of nature, as well as the high costs of war during times of crisis when there are more important things to do than fighting each other. This chapter gets some good points, don't get me wrong, particularly in the way of characters that are used, but it never filled anything out for me. I did get the vibes about the contrast of day and night and reflections and whatnot, but it never seemed to sing anything like the real ASWAF chapters do. I don't know, maybe I am missing something here, so let me know if you analyzed anything on your own or got more out of this chapter than I did. I would love to read your comments. Like every other Preston chapter thus far, the attention to detail has been the joy of following the project. Or the attention to some details. I'm thinking of the typos in this chapter and Kevin Lannister's messed up title in Elaine 2. The details which are followed closely are the fun part. Pate being mentioned as a candidate for Maester and swapping Bloodraven and Aemon, One Eye is quite joyful, as well as the callbacks to the dance in Vagar. The inclusion of the small folk and their views and opinions was always nice as well, as we never see enough of them since the story is focused around Highborn. The inclusion of the political details regarding the complex situation in Dorne are nice, though I'm not sure if the writers got a little too into it. It seemed unnecessarily complex at points. I know part of that is Preston's influence, but a little of it goes a long way for me. The openings of each chapter so far have ranged from being as smooth as a serrated blade to as subtle as a brick in the face. I'm thinking of Dany 1 and Elaine 2 in particular. This opening line here, the obelisk drank the morning light, is actually subtle, and unless I'm missing something, is quite a nice way to open a chapter conjuring up mental images of day and night, contrast, or Darkstar. The closing line was, well, not that, Where do Septas go is another needless parallel in my opinion, as Tyrion and Hotah are thematically unrelated. Tyrion is a broken man struggling with the fact he may never be loved by anyone again, on a quest to destroy his family and use his intelligence to make everyone else around him as miserable as possible simply because he is. Arrow Hotah is a passive man, coming to terms with his own agency and sense of self. He is far from intelligent, but much more deliberate than Tyrion's carefree attitude. Why parallel the two at all? They aren't even contrasting, they're just not related. Hotah as a POV has many more parallels to some of the themes of, say, Davos or even Melisandre, people struggling with loyalty and complex systems much larger than them, Davos in the complex northern plot, and Melisandre wrapped up in magic and prophecy. Elena and Jaime could also work in some extent, as they are both making radical changes to who they are as characters, just like Hotah is in these outline chapters. On the topic of the closing line, where do Septas go, what does that exactly mean? No one is really sure, and we puzzled over this in the podcast, but there seems to be a few theories. It is possibly a Lamore reference in some capacity, but it's more likely either about Tyene Stan or Septa Eglantine. Tyene Sand is described as a Septa and has ties to Old Town, where Eglantine is Myrcella's Septa we haven't seen since A Feast for Crows. There is an odd line in this chapter where Hotah remembers Tyene and her giggle, so I lean more towards the former theory. The line is actually somewhat confusing to a lot of people, and it seems to come out of the blue to many, including myself when first reading the chapter. The reason Hotah asks where do Septas go is due to a line from Arrow 1, where he is told that Myrcella is traveling with a Septa. This fully doesn't excuse the line. Septas obviously go to Old Town, so it's probably some weird misdirect, but it still sticks out, and it's a jarring end to an otherwise smooth chapter. One fun thing I noticed was that some people seem to think that Obara might not be dead. We never see her body, and it remains possible that she snuck off as part of some greater plot. I guess this is possible, but it just seems pointless, as she was already clearly dying, and how would she have been healed or faking her injuries or what? What is the motive here? Again, it's fun to theorize, though. Interestingly, we don't see much of any other PJ theories. Despite so many easy ways to reference or even confirm Lemongate, as some drafts did, no such references are present. Of course, the chapter centers on the Dornish master plan, but I didn't see anything about, say, Dragon Rider genetics that could have been brought up. Just interesting that such things are being held back now. So what do I think of this chapter? To me, this chapter is well written, except for a few glaring typos, smooth, except for one jarring ending, and develops its characters well, except for Obara, who dies for seemingly no reason. I give it a 68, passing if you want it to. It wasn't bad, certainly better than a few ASWAF chapters, but not up to the average standard of Martin's work, and well shy of the better chapters of this fanfic project so far, or even Arrow 1. But that's all I have to say about this chapter. Rumor has it that John Con is next in Area, and 3 is after that. In editing here, we actually just got confirmation that John Con 1, 2, and Arian 3 have all released, and they are all about different POVs looking at the Battle of Storm's End. This is a little upsetting, in my opinion, but I suppose it makes sense since the outlines are focusing on certain geographies and plots as opposed to looking across the actual ordering of chapters in the Real Winds of Winter. We're 8 chapters in, and we've got nothing on the complete northern plot and its many POVs, nothing from Brienne, the Wall, Jaime, Cersei, anything in the Riverlands, King's Landing, the Myronese Nautics not being untied. It's not really a problem, but most of the excitement people have built around this project seems to be from these diverse POVs, and instead we're getting more looks at the politics of Dorne and the Southlands more than anything else. The Discord was active as always with the drafts. I read at least 4, and they were all outstanding renditions of Preston's initial outline. There are also drafts of other chapters like always, and I encourage you to join the Discord to help check them out. Other than that, we went through and reconstructed a lot of the Discord to make it better and more accessible experience for everyone. Feel free to join using the link in the description, and I hope to see you all there. Other than that, thank you all so very much for 600 subscribers. Do take care, and I will see you all next time.